So, here with a prescription for a healthy city. Please join with me in welcoming to the podium Dr. Eric Walsh.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for coming out. I want to thank our esteemed mayor for having me here today. The committee, I really enjoyed talking with you guys over this week, setting this up. I also want to thank a group that often doesn't get thanked, and that are my colleagues on the executive leadership team at the City of Pasadena. I know it sounds funny, but these are very hardworking people who really put the city first, really work hard to make the city better. So I really want to make sure I recognize them for all the hard work they do. I also want to recognize the City Council. I want to say that the City Council has actually helped me to really strengthen my belief in American democracy. And it's watching how they work together to make things happen and to really do what's best for the city really has emboldened my passion for this country and for what we do. But I thank the City Council as well for all the hard work that they put in. With that said, we're going to get into our talk. And I was given this topic, the prescription for a healthy city. But I like the topic because I want to take us somewhere with this. And I'm going to start off in the book of Luke, the 19th chapter. Don't worry, this is not a sermon. But, you know, a little Bible at a prayer breakfast probably doesn't hurt. In Luke 19, the 41st verse, the Bible is speaking of Jesus, and it says, when he approached Jerusalem, he saw the city and he wept over it, saying, if you had known in this day, even you, the things which make for peace, but now they have been hidden from your eyes. Jesus is sitting above, looking down at the beautiful city of Jerusalem, a city whose name literally means peace. As he looks at the city and he realizes what is to come upon the city, like most cities in world history, Jerusalem really is no different, except that it is a holy city by three of the major religions in the world. He looks down and he recognizes that peace has left the city. It's occupied at this time by the Roman Empire, and Rome eventually is going to fight the uprisings that continue to happen in Jerusalem. And as he looks at the city, he weeps. And there are only 2 times in the Bible that Jesus is recorded to have wept. This is one of them. And the other time, of course, is outside of the tomb of Lazarus. And the reason Jesus weeps both times isn't because he can't fix the problem. In fact, he's about to raise Lazarus from the dead as he cries. But he weeps because Jesus cannot stand to see men suffer. He can't stand the pain. And as he, in his prophetic eye, looks down through history and sees all of the suffering that would come to earth, represented by the dead Lazarus, as Jesus looks at it, he cries. So I ask you today, what makes for a healthy city? Well, there are a lot of things that we do. And so Forbes produces a list of healthy cities, and they use some of these things to predict it. And Washington, D.C. has won 2 years in a row. And in 2010, Washington, D.C. dropped down to number 2. And Minneapolis, Minnesota jumped up to number 1. There's a picture here. And some of the things that they say make for a healthy city are open spaces, walking and biking trails, the health of individuals, quality health care services, access to fresh fruits and vegetables. All our low smoking rates are very important. Low rates of certain diseases. All of these things are factored in, and they come up with these lists. And they say, these are the healthiest cities in America. And of course, all of these things are critically important. And in fact, I love this city because the city has most of these things in place. But it's interesting because even though D.C. wins 2 years in a row and comes up second in the third year, when you look at a train map of the city of Washington, D.C., and some of you have seen me show this before, if you start down here in the southeast corner of the city, you have one of the poorest, most violent neighborhoods in all of the United States of America. If you move out into the suburbs here in Maryland, what you find are that you find some of the most affluent, most prosperous neighborhoods in America. For every mile you travel from the Capitol Heights station in the southeast section of D.C., life expectancy increases by 1.5 years as you travel out to Maryland. For every mile you travel. In fact, the average suburbanite near the Shady Grove station will live 20 years longer than the typical city dweller around Capitol Heights. And they won the healthiest city 2 years in a row. You see, because when we gauge health, sometimes we focus on things that seem to make a lot of sense, but being truly healthy is so much deeper than what your hemoglobin A1C is. It has a lot more to do with the average blood pressure of a city. And what I really want to bring to you is the next dimension in health. Where do you go to get beyond simply the rigors of numbers? And at the University of Miami in medical school, they taught me that you don't treat numbers, you treat patients. People run up to me all the time. It's only one of the bad things about people knowing I'm a doctor in the city is I literally will be out to eat somewhere and someone will sit next to me and say, you know, my cholesterol was checked and it's 300. So what else might make a healthy city? There are those that argue it's transportation systems. It's the skyline, economic growth, or affluent neighborhoods that such a city is a healthy city. But we know from cities like Los Angeles and New York and Chicago that you can have all of those things and still have sections of town that are devoid of health and of prosperity. In fact, if you look around the world, cities like Mexico City and Santiago and Chile are cities that have these incredible splits in who's who in the city. So if we speak about then the built environment, again, Jesus in Mark 13, verse 1, he says, as he was going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, behold, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings." And Jesus said to them, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down." One of the great privileges I had, now, my mother was a single mother, and we grew up poor. I joke a lot of times about the fact that my older brother was 7 years older than me, so it was really a generational problem when I had to wear his hand-me-downs. It was really messed up in the 80s to be wearing his bell-bottoms from the 70s. It really was. People say, "Yo, you're so well dressed." I have a lot of scars I cover up with my suits, right? But one of the things my mother was able to do for me is that she sent me in the 11th grade to the Alexander Muse High School in Israel program in Netanya, Israel. For 2 months, I studied Jewish history with a Jewish gentleman who had made Aliyah and come back to Israel. He inspired me, actually tried to get me to convert to Judaism. And I actually did consider it. And I won't tell you why. Okay, I'll tell you why. I really was impressed with the young ladies that came from Yemen, the Jewish women who had come back. I had this problem. I was really torn. I was really willing to give up all of my religion to stay. But I had to go home to my mother. But while there, they took me to the Wailing Wall. And it was one of the most moving experiences. The rabbis placed prayers were placed in the walls, and the rabbis would stand there and just pray for the city. Just pray for their people. Pray at a wall that was really a remnant of a wall that wasn't even a part of the original temple, according to what the teacher taught me. But they prayed because of a hope that they had of the restoration of what Israel once was. That moved me. And I learned a lot from it, because I learned that a nation and a people, I learned in Israel, is not defined by buildings. It's not defined even by having a nation, because they moved into a nation as a nation before they were a nation. And I learned there that sometimes we can focus on all of the glass and cement and all of the pretty buildings and all of the incredible development and still miss what makes a nation, a people, or a city healthy. In fact, in Ezekiel, one of the things that is said that is a powerful verse of scripture as Ezekiel is dealing with Israel, as Israel is in exile and in a captive city, Ezekiel says, look, as God is speaking to him, look, this was the iniquity of your sister city. And this verse outlines 4 things that made the city unhealthy in the eyesight of God. The first was pride. Pride made the city unhealthy. Fullness of bread made the city unhealthy. Abundance of idleness. And the last thing is, neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. 4 things. Pride. And one of the things that happened to me when we moved from Connecticut to Miami, so I could finish high school, is I was bused from the predominantly black southern section of Miami, a little further north into Miami Palmetto High School, which is always one of the top 50 high schools in the United States. Always great school, and I really did enjoy it. 40% of our student population was Jewish. Part of the reason they had this program. So I was the one black kid that got to go to Israel. It was cool. I really did enjoy it. But one of the things that happened to me on the first day I went into school, and I went into the bathroom, is that when I walked into the bathroom, there was a picture drawn on the wall of an ape with a noose around its neck. And underneath it said, N-words, go back to Africa. I grew up in Connecticut where in a car there might be a Jewish kid next to a Puerto Rican kid, next to a black kid, next to a white kid, or an Irish kid, an Italian kid. We all be overloaded going to the movies. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. And it was a constant thing at the school. And I don't tell you that to tell you that story, but to tell you my reaction was that I became hypervigilant. I became super sensitive, and in fact, in a sense, began to become someone who hated others myself. It led me to a place many years later when I began to go and hear someone by the name of Louis Farrakhan. Not the proudest chapter in my life, but I tell you this because I think you should know the power of prayer and of hope. And I remember going to the Miami Arena years later and sitting there as Louis Farrakhan got up to speak. And everyone applauded. And I was a little, wondering what was going to happen. And I remember he began to speak, and he said, the black man is the original man. And he said, I can prove it. So I was a scientist at the time. I sat up in my chair. I want to hear this proof. Right? He said 66 trillion years ago. 6 trillion? That's a long time, bro. He said 66 trillion years ago, he said, the black man blew the moon off of the earth with dynamite. What? And he said, I can prove it. He said, when the astronauts went to the moon, they could still smell the dynamite. I have to tell you, I repented in my chair. I sat and asked God to forgive me for being so easily led astray. You see, you can't be healthy if your pride drives you to believe you're better than someone else. It'll have you to begin to suspend 5th grade science. Because obviously the only thing they smelled on the moon was what they brought with them from the earth. But this is what pride does. It leads us to a place where we begin to believe we're better than others. And that can quickly destroy, not them, but us. I tell Christian groups all the time, an arrogant Christian is an oxymoron. Doesn't exist. The second thing, of course, is fullness of bread, having so much. And we live in a time, of course, in America where there's more and more billionaires being produced. But what we often are forgetting is that the gap between the rich and the poor is being exacerbated. There's a huge spread that's happening. And as this happens, we begin to move away from being a developed country towards being a developing country. Idleness. I have a statistic that says that in Los Angeles County, at any given time, there are 90,000 young people under the age of 24 who are not working and are not in school. My Jamaican grandmother would say it like this. She would say that an idle mind is the devil's workshop. But they did not help the poor and the needy. Those are the 4 sins of that city. And those are the 4 sins that made the city unhealthy. How those things manifest? Homicide risk and education. When you look at statistics like this, you realize that if you live in a neighborhood where 35 to 83% of the people do not have a high school diploma, that in fact you have a risk ratio increase to over 2.5 times those who grow up in a neighborhood where less than 15% of the people have a high school diploma. In fact, when we look at violence and the epidemiology of violence, a country like Scotland, when you look at males aged 15 to 34, only 5.3 per 100,000 have a risk of as the homicide risk. In the United States,
I've got enough of this asshole.
But if you move to the next column, you see for white Americans, it's 19 per 100,000. But as you drop down and look at Latinos, it jumps.
He never even returned a call, emails, letters, nothing. That guy is a fucking poser, he's a poser. King poser.
From Harvard University down to Haiti to serve, and looks at all of the problems and has devoted on the medical system.
Was that your test?
And what all as I look at America today, and at our state even, is that just as happened, if you ever study what created the developing nations' economic conditions, and you really look at the IMF and the World Bank and what they did as these countries came into independence all over the world, that there are things that they did and what they forced the nations to agree to. And what they did is they required that they give up spending in 2 areas to make sure the loans could be repaid. It was always in health and education. And the reason poor countries today are poor are because many times they invested in roads and buildings and didn't invest in their people. And let me submit something to you. In fact, a real developing nation and a real developed nation, the difference simply is this. A developed nation invests in its people. If you cease to do that, you cut funding to education, you cut funding for healthcare, you cut funding for the programs that will develop people, that will strengthen and build the middle class. If you cut those programs, you begin to go backwards on the trajectory to development. In fact, Mother Teresa said it like this. She said, we think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, and homeless. But watch what she says here. She says, the poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is this self-righteous programs. We should.
Son of a bitch. Well, that's good, man. That's good. Oh, that's good.
And just as you can find the of a spirit faith, hope, and love, the greatest of these is love.
I can't believe you found that. Oh my God, I'm grateful. That's my guy, dude. I'm gonna write letters again. That's my guy. That's who I get to write the letters to.